Tarot. Today, we're decoding the one question that is absolutely dominating global headlines. After the intense military escalation in the Middle East, is this World War III?
So, after those massive coordinated US-Israeli strikes on Iran and the swift, widespread retaliation that followed, the entire world is kind of holding its breath. You've seen it, right? The phrase World War III is trending everywhere. But is that fear actually grounded in reality? Or is it more of a reaction to a chaotic and deeply uncertain situation? To figure that out, we need to separate the hard facts from the fear.
So here's what we're going to break down. First, we'll frame the whole World War question itself. Then we'll walk through exactly what happened in the Middle East. After that, we'll define what a global war actually is and see how this event fits into a wider pattern of conflict. And finally, we'll look beyond all the speculation to explore three possible futures.
Okay, so our first step is to really get our heads around the two parallel conversations that are happening right now. You've got the story being told online, and then you have the story being told through diplomatic channels and military assessments. They're not the same. On one side, you have this absolute storm of online speculation. We're seeing World War III memes, people frantically searching for Nostradamus predictions, and that simple, really anxious question, has it started? And this reflects a very real global anxiety. But on the other side, you have this sober geopolitical analysis, which is looking at historical precedent and focusing on the actual diplomatic reactions from world leaders. Our goal today is to bridge that gap between these two worlds.
To do that, we have to get grounded in the facts first. What exactly happened on February 28th that set the entire world on edge?
The escalation was, it was incredibly rapid. It all kicked off in the morning with a massive, coordinated air campaign by the United States and Israel right across Iran. By midday, the world learned the primary target had been hit. Iranian state media confirmed that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was dead. Iran's response was almost immediate. Through the afternoon and into the evening, it launched this huge barrage of retaliatory missile and drone strikes. And then, overnight, the conflict spilled across the region, with attacks reported in multiple Gulf nations.
Now, the significance of these strikes really comes down to the targets. This wasn't just an attack on infrastructure. It was a full-on decapitation strike aimed right at the regime's core. The killing of Supreme Leader Khamenei, who'd ruled for nearly 40 years, is just a monumental event. Also killed were General Mohammed Pakpour, who was the commander of the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is this huge military, political, and economic force in Iran, and the top national security advisor, Ali Shamkhani. The message here was crystal clear. This was an attack on the very heart of the Iranian regime.
And Iran's retaliation was just as significant, not just in its targets, but in its sheer breadth. Vowing what they called the most devastating offensive operation in their history, Iran didn't just hit back at Israel. Nope, it launched attacks on U.S. bases and allies across the entire region. Explosions were reported in the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. The message from Tehran was just as clear. An attack on Iran will be treated as an attack on the entire region, and they're willing to turn it into a massive theater of conflict to raise the cost for their enemies.
And amidst all this geopolitics, we have to remember the human cost. The Red Crescent reported that those initial strikes killed more than 200 people across Iran. This is a real conflict with absolutely devastating real-world consequences, which is exactly why the world is watching so closely.
So, with the stakes this high, we have to circle back to that central question. We've seen the facts of the escalation. Now let's analyze the label everyone's using, World War III. Does this conflict actually meet the historical criteria? This question is absolutely everywhere, and it's fueled by the sheer speed and scale of the conflict. The term World War III is circulating because the core ingredients for a wider war seem to be there. You've got major powers directly involved, the sovereignty of nations has been violated, and there's this complex web of regional and global alliances in play. But, and this is a big but, it's crucial to remember that public speculation driven by fear is not the same thing as a confirmed geopolitical reality. Okay, so let's get precise. Historically, a world war isn't just a big war. It has a pretty specific definition. It's a large-scale international conflict that involves multiple great powers. We're talking Russia, China, the US, European powers, all fighting across several continents in sustained, direct military engagement. That's our benchmark for analysis. So when we compare the current crisis to that historical definition, the gaps become really clear. In terms of who's involved, historical world wars had these huge blocks of great powers, like the Axis versus the Allies. Right now, we have a few major powers involved, sure, but the fighting is primarily being carried out by regional actors. In terms of scope, world wars are global. This conflict, while incredibly dangerous, is so far contained primarily to the Middle East. And crucially, just look at the global reaction. World War I saw this cascade of war declarations. Today, the immediate response has been the exact opposite.
Instead of everyone choosing sides for a global fight, the international community is scrambling to contain the fire. G7 leaders immediately held emergency calls. The United Nations condemned the operation for undermining peace. European nations are pretty much uniformly urging for diplomacy and de-escalation. And get this, even Russia, a key geopolitical player, condemned the initial attacks and called for peace, not for an expansion of the war. The world's powers are actively trying to prevent a world war, not start one.
So to really understand why the world is trying to pull back from the brink, we need to zoom out. Because what's happening now, while it's extreme, actually fits into a long-standing pattern of conflict in the Middle East.
And here's the key pattern to recognize. The Middle East has long been a geopolitical hotspot where regional wars draw in global powers. This is a recurring dynamic, and it doesn't automatically lead to a global free-for-all.
For decades, the region has been a theater for proxy wars, most recently in places like Syria and Yemen, where global powers backed different sides without engaging in direct, all-out conflict with each other. This pattern goes all the way back to the Cold War. Global powers have deep security and economic interest here, from oil supplies to strategic military bases, that keep them involved. But that involvement doesn't mean alliances automatically trigger a global war. And this helps us see the critical distinction here. What we are witnessing is a terrifying regional escalation, but it is not, by definition, a world war.
So if this isn't World War III, then what is it? And where does it go from here? Let's look at 3 sober, evidence-based scenarios for the future.
The first, and honestly the most hopeful scenario, is de-escalation. All those international calls for restraint that we're seeing now could actually work, leading to a very, very fragile calm. The second possibility is a contained conflict, a prolonged, brutal, and intense regional war, but one that stays geographically fought in the Middle East. And the third scenario is a wider escalation, where other nations get drawn in more directly, but still without meeting that high bar for a full-scale, multi-continental world war.
And here's the crucial point. For this crisis to become a true world war, we would need to see specific triggers that are, right now, completely absent. We would need to see formal declarations of war from major powers. We'd need to see mass military mobilization across multiple continents. And we would need to see treaty obligations, like NATO's Article 5, being invoked in a cascading failure of diplomacy. None of that has happened yet.
Look, we are witnessing one of the most serious escalations in the Middle East in decades. The danger is absolutely real. But the speculation about World War III isn't evidence, it's a reaction to that uncertainty. And at Neural Terror, we don't just repeat fear, we decode the drivers and the global patterns to give you a clearer picture.
And that leaves us with a final question. The immediate crisis and the lines of conflict are clear. But with the leader of Iran gone and the region in flames, what unseen pattern, what new balance of power will emerge from this chaos to define the new Middle East? That is the pattern to watch.